I have the distinct honor and pleasure to introduce our first Eleanor Roosevelt Prize recipient, Benjamin Ferencz. Ben, in my experience, is a man of boundless energy, a quick, dry wit, and in his self-deprecating fashion, often makes fun of his relatively diminutive physical stature. However, there is no diminishing in his stature in the annals of modern international criminal justice. He is an intellectual giant. While the career track of many new lawyers, past and present, begins with a law firm, the more prestigious the better for future and financial other prospects, Ben literally began his career at age 27, prosecuting and convicting Nazis for carefully organized, implemented and documented mass murder. Ben was born in the Carpathian Mountains of Transylvania in 1920. When he was 10 months old, his family moved to the United States, settling not far from here in Hell's Kitchen. After graduating from Harvard Law School in 1943, Ben enlisted in the Army and served under General Patton, fighting in major campaigns throughout Europe. As Nazi atrocities were uncovered, Ben was transferred to a newly created war crimes branch of the Army to gather evidence of Nazi brutality and to apprehend criminals. Indelibly seared into my memory, Ben has said, are the scenes that I witnessed while liberating these centers of death and destruction. Even today, when I close my eyes, I witness a deadly vision that I can never forget. The crematoria aglow with fire of burning flesh, the mounds of emaciated corpses, stacked like cordwood, waiting to be burned. I had peered into hell. Shortly after his honorable discharge from the Army, Ben was recruited for the Nuremberg war crimes trials, led by Supreme Court Justice Robert M. Jackson. Once the trial against Goering and other Nazi leaders was over, the U.S. had decided to prosecute a broad cross-section of Nazi criminals. General Telford Taylor was assigned as chief counsel for 12 subsequent trials. Ben was tasked, along with about 50 researchers, to Berlin to scour Nazi offices and archives. They found overwhelming evidence of Nazi genocide by German doctors, lawyers, judges, generals, industrialists, and others who played leading roles in organizing or perpetrating Nazi brutalities. Without pity or remorse, the SS murder squads killed every Jewish man, woman, and child that they could lay their hands on. Gypsies, communist functionaries, homosexuals, and Soviet intellectuals suffered the same fate. Thanks to the meticulous Nazi records, it was tabulated that more than 1 million persons were deliberately murdered by these special action groups. Ben became the chief prosecutor for the United States in the Einsatzgruppen case, which the Associated Press called the biggest murder trial in history. 22 defendants were charged with murdering more than 1 million people. This was Ben's first case. All the defendants were convicted. Ben's primary objective in the trial had been to establish a legal precedent that would encourage a more humane and secure world in the future. Nuremberg taught me, he said, that creating a world of tolerance and compassion would be a long and arduous task. Ben said that. I also learned that if we did not devote ourselves to developing an effective world law, the same cruel mentality that made the Holocaust possible might one day destroy the entire human race. His dedication to that primary objective has never wavered since. To that end, his primary focus was the establishment of a permanent international criminal tribunal to punish and deter the world's worst crimes. He wrote or co-authored numerous influential books, lighting the way to achieving that vision. His opus work, entitled Planethood, co-written by Ken Keyes in 1988, offered practical steps for the average citizen to take to help more deeply establish international law and urge United Nations reform. It was critically acclaimed, with more than 450,000 copies printed. With the end of the Cold War, the international community finally proved ready to explore seriously the possibility of establishing an international criminal court, and BIN remained a diving voice of optimism. When the Rome Statute creating the court was affirmed by vote in 1998, BIN addressed the conference, asserting that pending the statute's ratification by sufficient number of countries, an international criminal court, the missing link in the world legal order, is within our grasp. It was ratified in record time, a mere 4 years later in 2002, reflecting the world's agreement with BIN's lifelong vision. Since then, BIN has continued to mobilize support for the ICC, taking on media punditries and informing an often misinformed media about the court. Indeed, with the progress that has been made since 2002, BIN's objective goal of replacing the rule of force with the rule of law may, in the broad sweep of history, seem imminent. Of course, in the last few days, the Trump administration has initiated a broadside against the ICC. China has called for internment camps against the Uyghur. Our own president has referred to Japanese internment camps as a proud moment in our history. And of course, he is a neo-Nazi apologist. It is a sad reminder that in today's world, a just rule of law is never guaranteed. A few of you know that my family had been dedicated for several generations to the battle of civil rights. It is frustrating beyond pain that I can describe that we are battling today the same issues that we have battled for hundreds of years, and that they are coming back more aggressively and forcefully than I have seen in my lifetime. I'm tired. However, my son will pick up the battle, my nieces and nephews will pick up the battle, but that will make 6 generations of battles for fundamental human rights. The right to vote, the right to control your own body, the right to breathe and be black. Each generation is called to vigilance in support of universal dignity, as articulated in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. BIN's life of work exemplifies why the American Bar Association Center for Human Rights must remain undaunted in the fight, and it is why we honor Ben Ferencz with the inaugural Eleanor Roosevelt Prize for Global Human Rights Advancement. Ben, please.
I appreciate everything done by the American Bar Association and all of you here to arrange this meeting and to recall the 70th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which has been a landmark in expressing human aspirations for a better world. My own connection with that, which has been briefly mentioned, I believe, is that I became the chief prosecutor in one of the subsequent Nuremberg trials after the International Military Tribunal trial was already on. And I accused 22 high-ranking officers selected by me on the basis of their rank and their education. They were all either generals or very well educated, some with double doctorates. And I accused them of crimes against humanity. And for the first time, I used the word genocide, although it was not yet incorporated into the laws, to describe what they were doing. These were special extermination squads, Einsatzgruppen. Einsatz means action, groups. Their assignment was to follow behind the German lines and kill every single Jewish man, woman, and child they could lay their hands on, and do the same thing with gypsies, and do the same thing with any other suspected potential opponents of the Third Reich. And that's what they did. And being very Germanic, they recorded everything in reports. Ereignismeldungen aus der UdSSR. That's to show off my German. In English, it is reports from the Eastern Front. And I had the name of the unit, the name of the commander, the number of people they reported killed, the name of the town, and that was marked top secret, forwarded to Berlin. Berlin, it was consolidated into a loose-leaf book. I had the distribution list of over 90 people to whom that was distributed, people who later said they knew nothing about it. I took a little adding machine and I added them up. When I reached 1 million people murdered, 1 million people, that's more people than you've ever looked at. I took a sampling. I flew from Berlin, where I had the headquarters to do the research, to Nuremberg. I presented that to my boss then, General Telford Taylor. Later, we were law partners in New York. And I said, we've got to put on a new trial. He said, we can't. The lawyers have already been assigned. We've got 12 trials going. The Pentagon's not going to give us any more budgets for this. We can't put on a new trial. I said, it's impossible. I have in my hand mass murder on a scale never before seen in human history. You're not going to let these guys go. And he said, well, can you do it in addition to your other work? And I said, sure. He said, okay, you're it. So I became the chief prosecutor of the biggest murder trial in human history. It was my first case. I had never been in a courtroom. It's true, I will confess. I got a scholarship from the Harvard Law School for my exam on criminal law. And I had been raised around here in the slums of New York. And I knew plenty of criminals. I didn't know any lawyers. However, with that background, I rested my case in 2 days. Marino Ocampo, eat your heart out. In 2 days, I rested my case and convicted all of them. And 13 of them were sentenced to death by 3 judges, American judges, led by Michael Musmano, who was the Navy captain during the war, and who was of Superior Court of Pennsylvania. And the important thing in connection with our human rights thinking, I asked myself, what do you ask for penalty? Here I've got these 22 guys, and this ridiculous reason, 22, because there are only 22 seats. Sorry, kids, the seats are sold out. 22 seats, and I had 3,000 men listed, each one of them, beyond any doubt, mass murder, including thousands of children shot one shot at a time. What do you ask for? Well, I thought, I'm trying to do justice. How do you balance the scales of justice? You got 1 million people murdered, innocent people who never committed any crimes, and then you got a handful of murderers, maybe more if you want to round them up. I said, there is no room for justice in a case like that. And if I could get a rule of law which would protect people, that might be more useful. Because the victims were murdered simply because they didn't share the race, the religion, or the ideology of their executioners. And I thought that was a horrible thing. And so I asked the court to affirm by international criminal law the right of all human beings to live in peace and dignity regardless of their race or creed. And the court agreed with me and sentenced 13 of them to death, but the rest of it was a principle of law. 4 were actually executed, then came clemency actions. So that principle of law, which I tried to develop as a young, inexperienced kid at 27, has remained with me. I have no doubt that my own experience as a combat soldier in World War II, I landed on the beaches of Normandy, I went through the Maginot Line, I went through the Siegfried Line, I crossed the Rhine on a pontoon bridge driving a Jeep. I was in the Battle of the Bulge. And in addition to that, my last assignments in the war, they finally caught up with the fact that I could do more than be a typist or a Jeep driver, was to go into the concentration camps as they were being liberated, collect the evidence of the crimes so that they could have trials against the offenders, as had been promised by the Allied leaders before the war ended. And that experience of going into the camps, hot with the tank troops coming in, has sadly remained with me. It's horror indescribable. people groveling in the garbage for a bit of food, piled up skeletons waiting to be burned by the crematoria like cordwood, and digging up American bodies who had been shot down by over German-held territory and had been murdered by the German mob on the ground and dumped in a ditch somewhere. I personally did all those things. When the war was over, I had the rank of sergeant of infantry. But I told the colonel, look, just get out of my way. I don't wear any insignia. I'll get the job done, and I did. I went home looking for a job. Suddenly I got a telegram from the Pentagon. Dear sir, they never called me sir before. Please come to Washington, dear sir. We said we'd like you to go back. Go back where? To Germany? I said, if you get me back to Germany, you're going to have to declare war on Germany again. We'll be losing. I said, we need you. Penny, we need you. I was interviewed by Colonel Mickey Marcus. The name may mean something to some of you. He was also a Jewish boy from the Lower East Side, and he was recruiting people for these trials, subsequent trials. And anyway, to make the long story short, I said, look, I won't go back into the military. I'll go back to the civilian with equivalent rank. And how long do I have to sign up for? They said, you can quit any time you want to. And I said, it's a deal. So I called my dear girlfriend, fiancée, if you want to be fancy, who had been waiting patiently while I went through law school and so on, who incidentally is a graduate of Hunter College. She came in, as I did, as a poor immigrant, lived in poverty most of our lives, and she became a school teacher in all the areas around here, and it was pretty rough going at a time when they had signs on the door, kill Whitey. And she couldn't talk about abortion. That was prohibited, and that was the main concern of the young girls who were there. Anyway, there I was, assigned to go into the camps, collect the evidence. I did collect the evidence, and I had the trial. And after that, I stayed on to set up the restitution program. There's very little known about that. Well, not all victims, not only Jewish victims, but any victim of Nazi crimes. Compensation. It was a principle I learned in the first year in law school. If you do a harm to someone, you have an obligation to try to make good. If you can't make good financially or otherwise, that you should try to do. So that's the background from which I come in the field of human rights. Human rights is not just an expression for me. I've seen what happens if you ignore the respect that is due to every human being, regardless of his color or his creed. And that has become a firm principle of my life and everything that I've done. Now, I want to leave a little time to say something which is bothering me. Because we've had these principles, these declarations, they're beautiful, protect everybody live in human and decent life and all that. 70 years old today, how far have we come? And why haven't we gone further? What are the obstacles? Declarations, they don't help. I mean, they're better than nothing. But we have to implement what we are doing. And so we have some people. America is a great democracy, and there will be people with differences of opinion. They'll even let opportunities go by. When we had a chance to elect the first female president, they goofed on that one too. No Republicans allowed here? Anyway, we have a great democracy, has differences of opinion, and that's as it should be. And they're entitled to respect, listen to their point of view. But it doesn't mean you have to agree. And if you disagree, you state your point of view. and let the public decide. That's the essence of democracy. Now we have our latest, in the last few days, a man representing the President of the United States. Now, again, a high State Department official talking about John Bolton, who issued a declaration. The ICC is dead. Americans will never yield to any foreign court trying our boys, an American. They quote the Service Members Protection Act, which you may be familiar, saying that if any American is arrested and taken to The Hague to be tried by an international criminal court, the United States is authorized to use all necessary means in order to liberate him, which means you can go to war. The Dutch took a very dim view of that, and the rest of Europe did as well. And one day I got a call from somebody in Holland and said, "Hey, Ben, we're going to protest against that, and we want you to join us. We're going to set up a barricade on the beach at Scheveningen, which is in Holland, where the court is, and we're going to wait for the Americans to attack." And I said, "How are you going to do that?" He said, "Well, we're going to have paper mache dolls with bayonets fixed, and we'll have real sandbags, and we're going to have the flags of all the 100 countries who agreed on the court. We're going to have the flags there, and we're going to challenge Mr. Bolton, who is the author of this fine document, to come on." I said, I'll join you on one condition, that I'm the last speaker and I haul up the American flag. They said, "You got a deal." Okay. So we come to the beach on that day. The American press was merely absent. It was a little raining. And they finally go through, and every guy who holds a flag said, "The United States, look, they're going to attack us for trying to put people on trial for war crimes on the United States." That's a brief summary. They come my term. And I say, "Look, guys and girls, I didn't come here to attack the United States. I came here once bearing the uniform of the United States Army, and I have come here to defend the United States because they've been falsely accused. They've said the Americans want war. They would rather come and fight and not let you put somebody on trial. They'd rather go to war. That's not the United States. That's a small portion of the United States. The United States is represented, and I want you to join me in saluting the American flag with the pledge, with liberty and justice for all." We hold up the flag. Then we have the problem that we face in the world today. There has been tremendous progress in the awakening of the human conscience, the liberation of many women, same-sex marriages, all kinds of things which were considered impossible. But we have made progress in that direction. The court itself, let me make another interesting little connection. I worked to create the court because it seemed to me logical as a lawyer. If you have a law, you have to have a court to enforce it, and you have to have a trial of the people who are responsible. And I made that statement everywhere I could, and got to be known for that. Incidentally, my website is my name, benferenz.org. Everything there is free. Books, articles, motion pictures, DVDs, BVDs, I don't know what. It's yours, have it, and details. Spread it around, sell it on the eBay, I don't care what you do. Well, I want to just jump to where I am. Because I was so active in creating the court itself, when they finally got to their first case, it was Marino Campo. It was a case against Lubanga, a man who had been seizing children, using them as child soldiers. And I made the same pitch I made in my first case. These are crimes against humanity. They should not be tolerated. We have to have a more humane approach. It's an appeal of humanity to law, He was convicted. And what is interesting is my first case, I was 27. Second one, I was 92. I am now 99 years old. So what does it all add up to? We're making progress. We've got a long way to go. Mr. Bolton, in his diatribe, recently issued, I don't know, 10 pages long, that the ICC is dead, should be dead. No American should be allowed to go before a foreign court. We are noble, we are good. We don't need these courts. They're just trying to interfere with our lifestyle and are trying to take advantage of us in every way. And I could hear in my mind, Deutschland, Deutschland, über alles in der Welt. Adolf Hitler talking. We are a great Germany. We will provide, we will prevail. They are persecuting us. We don't need courts. We'll decide it for ourselves. Well, I also remember, I've written a lot of books and I've written a lot of quotes. My Supreme Commander in World War II, General Dwight D. Eisenhower, you may be familiar with the name, a Republican, he said in one of his important speeches, in a very real sense, the world can no longer rely on force. If civilization is to survive, it must choose the rule of law. That is the opposite of what Mr. Bolton, acting for the United States, now preaches. And he's the one who, when the President of the United States, President Clinton, told the Ambassador David Sheffer on New Year's Eve to go down, hold the UN open, so he could sign on to the court in principle only. That was done as the last official act of President Clinton. And a few weeks later, John Bolton, speaking again for the United States, said that doesn't count, cross it out. Unheard of in history. Defiance or signature of the President of the United States by a lackey who's appointed later. That's the condition today. Well, you have to make the choice. You believe in Bolton's approach, or do you believe in Eisenhower? I believe in Eisenhower. He's got it right. And I know that we have the capacity today from cyberspace to cut off the electrical grid on planet Earth, which means we can kill everybody. Killing Washington, New York, that's easy, on the whole planet. We now have that capacity. The Russians have it too. So have Chinese. It's a big secret. It was told to me in very great confidence about 15 years ago in a conference I had in St. Petersburg, Russia. So the young people, and I meet them very often, are apprised of the danger to them. No danger to me, I'm 99, nobody can touch me. Nobody pays me, nobody hired me, I'm not the hire. I call the shots as I see them. And I tell the young people, your lives are at stake. Kids, don't take it. I get standing ovation. Don't tell me the United States is against the court, because the kids are for the court. It's quite rational. If somebody's accused of crimes, he's entitled to go to a court, be presumed innocent, get a fair trial, and get the punishment that belongs to the crime. That's the system we tried to set up, and it's the system we have going, with all of its problems, and I'm aware of all of the problems. And they're difficult. It's like the Wright brothers saying that put a wing on a bicycle and it'll fly. Well, it didn't fly, but eventually it worked. And we've got problems with the court. It's something new, and it's expensive, and it's hard to get the witnesses, and it's hard to arrest the criminals because they're the heads of state, and there's immunity. There are a lot of problems wrong with it. But we've got the court, and it's working. And it may look like it's illegal or undesirable to Mr. John Bolton, but how does it look to you? You're a bar association, human rights group. I'm proud to be associated with it. You're calling together these people who are dedicated to making it a more humane world. Don't stop now. Keep going.